Hello, and welcome back to another video where we'll be discussing the top 10 most underrated Pokemon of a generation. This time, we're doing Gold, Silver, and Crystal, the original Gen 2 games. Unlike the top 10 strongest videos, I'll be sticking to Pokemon introduced within the generation itself rather than all Pokemon available. And like before, this will mostly be specific to how good or bad they are in Gen 2, not the series overall. And like the underrated Pokemon of Gen 1, we'll also be focusing a little more on single player qualities and not competitive quite as much as some other videos. And of course, what I'll be constituting as what would qualify as underrated are the usual qualities. Pokemon that aren't talked about much, aren't outright amazing but still have an interesting or good use, and other aesthetic qualities like their design and such. I think you know how this goes, so let's just get right into the list. Also, Mystic Reeds. A lot of Pokemon were considered for this list at the number 10 spot. Donphan? Underrated, but still acknowledged as pretty strong pretty often when it comes to Gen 2 Pokemon. Crobat? A similar story and even more popular. Maybe Sneasel? Well, it's not the best without its evolution just yet, but it's also still a pretty popular form to this day. So ultimately, for the number 10 spot, I decided on Giraffarig. See that mental groan you just had after all the cooler Pokemon I just named? Yeah, that's why it's here. Anyway, Normal Psychic is a pretty interesting type combo, and it's just not talked about too much. In Gen 2, compared to its contemporaries, it's pretty decent. Psychic is still a typing that stands above most, though the normal typing does admittedly not have much use here, just the immunity to Ghost, which is very good against Morty. Its physical attack isn't bad, but most players are definitely gonna just try to get the most out of Psychic, coverage, and probably Amnesia or something. So I'm not sure how good it is in the modern meta for Gen 2 these days. As I mentioned in my most underrated team for Johto, it comes in really good handy for Morty. So I think the placement for it is actually pretty good, especially considering you can go through Mount Mortar before you get Surf. But I still consider it underrated, because there are other psychic types you can get earlier. Here is one that some players definitely used, but isn't talked about too much gameplay-wise after GSC, Sudowoodo. It's crazy that there's only one of these in the entire game. I'll say it now. One of the reasons this thing is underappreciated is because, as a static encounter, it's gonna be compared to Snorlax. And Snorlax is leagues better than Sudowoodo. But still, Sudowoodo is the only pure rock type in the entire game somehow. And while its speed is unsurprisingly bad, 115 defense and 100 attack is pretty great, making it one of the strongest stab rock slide users. That being said, it doesn't get the most out of its move options past Rock Slide. You'll probably end up having Earthquake alongside it or something, and it won't be stab damage like Rhydon or something. But that pure rock typing is still an interesting niche, as it means you'll be able to resist very common normal type attacks in your playthrough without having a 4 times weakness to something that's also common like water. Actually, that alone with high attack makes it pretty underrated for playthroughs. But there's a reason it's up at number 9. It doesn't have any crazy options. You're gonna possibly put Curse on it and go to town with attacks. But hey, you get to have a tree-looking monster follow you around, and that's pretty cool. Next up, we have Lantern. It's actually quite common for this one to be brought up as underrated, and I agree. Its water-electric type combo is really special, giving it only 2 weaknesses in ground and grass and a bunch of resistances. Plus, you get Stab, Thunderbolt, and Surf. The big problem that holds it back from being a staple powerhouse in Gen 2 is its really middling 76 base special attack stat. But on the flip side, it's pretty tanky with 125 base HP. One thing that some people may not think about for playthrough stuff is being able to learn the 3 water HMs the game has. Believe it or not, some water types can't learn all 3 of them in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, like Lapras, Quagsire, and Feraligatr, all pretty popular choices. Of course, putting them all on one Pokemon may not be desirable for a lot of people, since it can result in a pretty weird moveset, especially before the physical special split. Man, HMs became such a terrible mechanic so early in the series. But anyway, I'd still consider it a plus for Lantern in Gen 2 if you're looking for a Pokemon that can use all 3 of those HMs and still have room for another stab with a good secondary typing. Here's one that actually did make it in his strongest list recently, but for a totally different generation, Gen 5. But here in GSC, I think it's kind of underappreciated. Politoed. This is one that I feel would be at least a little more popular here if it had a moveset that could take better advantage of Belly Drum or something. It's a very basic water type, but a pretty decent one. Actually, my biggest problem with it, in a general sense, is the trait evolution requirement, making it a bit of a process to get for some. That being said, there's not too much to say here. It's just generally a bit underappreciated due to various circumstances. I think one of the other unique things it has, besides Belly Drum, is Lovely Kiss, which I would recommend trying to keep on it. Otherwise, it kind of gets by at times on its unbelievably cute design. Lantern is cute too, but you just want to give Politoed a huge hug. This Pokemon, at least at the time, wasn't used much. Its type combo is pretty terrible defensively, but really cool offensively. It was also acquired real late in Johto. We're talking about Piloswine. With 100 base attack, Stab, Earthquake, and Blizzard are going to wreak havoc in this game. Remember, this is early in the series, so that's a very solid amount of power behind this monster. But again, it takes a while to reach even Swinub, so most players just didn't really use it because they were attached to their team composition already. Aside from Piloswine's 100 attack and HP, however, the rest of its stats aren't great. Even when it gets a new evolution in Gen 4, those other stats don't increase that much. It's all gas and no brakes for this guy. And I think that's why I think it has an appeal to it. The typing is fitting aesthetically, it's unique gameplay-wise, and Stab, Blizzard, and Earthquake just feel secure to have together. Not to mention, Earthquake with Curse is incredible in Gen 2. So yeah, even before getting an evolution, I think this is a decent Pokemon that can still be worth using the next time you play the original Johto games. Now we're going from a bad defensive typing to an incredible one, because here comes Quagsire. This Pokemon is so underrated in the grand scheme of the series that I often forget that the Water-Ground type combo didn't actually start with Swampert in Gen 3. It's not crazy strong like Swampert in its debut gen, but it's still really good. It's one of the main Pokemon I associate with Belly Drum, since it's accompanied by Stab Earthquake. You know, I could just end that entry right there, to be honest. That combined with the typing, already great. It does have the same problem as Swampert would though, which is basically being atomized by grass attacks. One hidden power grass as coverage is typically enough, let alone actual stab grass attacks. The other issue, I suppose, would be its stats. Good base physical stats and HP, but the rest isn't good, and it's predictably slow. But I mean, it's cute, it hits hard enough, typing is good, and you can get a Wooper pretty early in the game. I think it's an easy top 5 placement here. If you grew up around some of the promotional material for GSC back in the day, then this entry may be one of the first new evolutions you'll think of in Gen 2, Bellossom. It's not quite as strong as Meganium as far as mono grass types go, but it's still one of the better ones in the game. Some may think of Sunny Day here, but it's not quite as good to use in Gen 2 as it is in Gen 4, though it is still an option for Bellossom. What it does have are the spore options, and having Sleep Powder is always a big deal. Moonlight, Leech Seed, and Giga Drain all give Bellossom some sustainability options to go along with its 100 base special defense. It's just got a really solid moveset in general. Most of its stats are pretty okay otherwise, besides its 50 base speed. I think the main thing that holds it back is that speed. I often find myself wishing I could set up with Sleep Powder or something else faster to get a head start as a Pokemon with a lot slower paced and support related moves. But otherwise, it's another good Pokemon with another fantastic design. It does get some use from players in Gen 2, but I don't think it gets the credit it deserves with how much it can do and just how iconic its design really is. Starting off the top 3 is Qwilfish. Actually, I had no idea where I wanted to put this thing on the list. Like, it's pretty good, but it's rare to find people too passionate about this guy, and how popular I felt it was really is why I'm putting it in the top 3. Not only is it a pretty decent Pokemon, but it's a spike setter. Decent and spike setter should be enough to make something pretty popular in these early gens, but I think it may just be because its design doesn't really stick out that much. Also, maybe some people aren't the biggest fans of its poison typing. After Gen 1, the poison secondary typing just felt very run-of-the-mill and a hard sell in general, despite the typing being somewhat improved in Gen 2. If you want to talk competitive, it's the best spike setter in the underused tier, making it a total menace there. Also, since all poison attacks are physical still, Sludge Bomb takes advantage of its high physical attack stat, rather than its horrible special attack. It's also another water type that can learn the 3 water HMs if you actually want to do that for your playthrough. But having to choose Sludge Bomb or Spikes for your last slot and not having both will feel pretty painful. But yeah, don't let Qwilfish's small stature and simple design fool you. It's worth trying out for sure. I've seen this Pokemon listed as an underrated Fairy-type Pokemon in the past, especially in the X and Y days. But back in Gen 2, this was an underrated normal type instead. We're talking about Granbull. The normal typing, while not as dominant as it was in Gen 1, was still fine in Gen 2. And base 120 physical attack was nearly unrivaled back then, making its stab return very reliable, or frustration if you really prefer. It's also able to learn a lot of coverage options, though you'll need to bear in mind that its special attack is only 60. Its speed is even worse at 45. Imagine if it had at least like 85 speed or something. I think it probably would have seen a little more use. In UU competitive, it's actually quite good by just using your stab normal attack, along with Curse, Rest, and Sleep Talk. All very common basic options in Gen 2 competitive that work perfectly in its favor as a physical attacker. Yet, it's actually kind of an overlooked menace that isn't talked about too much. But then again, with Snorlax just kind of overshadowing everything, both figuratively and literally, it's maybe not too hard to see why. Anyway, Granbull is ultimately pretty decent for a Pokemon that looks like Spike from Tom and Jerry. And here we are at number 1. I wasn't really planning on putting this one up here, but I started to realize a while back that my original opinion of this Pokemon may have been a bit harsh at one point. Jumpluff. This thing is so annoying to deal with in competitive if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And in your in-game playthroughs, those same annoying strategies are actually very good too, especially if you're approaching the game in a way where you're going to be underleveled in major battles. It's just one of the best support Pokemon in the entire game. And remember when I said I wished Bellossom was a bit faster to take advantage of the list of support moves and such? Well, Jumpluff has a very similar moveset, and it's really fast at base 110 speed. Its attacks aren't good, but when you bring it out, your opponent usually has no choice but to just deal with Sleep Powder attempts, which are usually followed by things like Leech Seed, Giga Drain, and maybe even Encore to really nail home the annoying moveset options. If Jumpluff weren't fast, this thing wouldn't even be in the top 5. In fact, it may not even be on the list at all. But when you can do what Jumpluff does, and you outspeed almost everything that spells disaster for you, it's also the reason why Jumpluff is quite good in the underused tier and not all the way down in never used. Well, at least not until later gens. And for your in-game runs, you can get Hoppip really early in the game, and it reaches its final evolution as early as level 27. you'll find this little guy to be more than just a cute face on your Gen 2 team, because as it turns out, it's actually pretty good. And those are the top 10 most underrated Pokemon of GSC. For the most part, this list didn't include Pokemon that were perhaps a bit too strong to include, like Fortress, who isn't super popular, but is acknowledged more than enough as an excellent Pokemon in Gen 2. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with this list? Any Pokemon you'd like to add that I never mentioned? Are there any Pokemon that people never talk about that performed well for you in game? Let me know down below. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching my content. With Scarlet and Violet DLC on the way, we have a lot to be excited for. Not just that though, but I've got a bunch of other cool series planned throughout the year that I'm sure you guys will love. If you want to support my other forms of content, over on Mystic Reads, I read fanfics. One of them right now is Road to be a Pokemon Master Kanto Edition, where Ash and Serena start from the very beginning and journey through Kanto together. On Mystic Umbreon Shorts, I do other exclusive Pokemon content such as Pokemon Facts, and on Saturdays I upload my top 5 favorite Pokemon of the type. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an excellent day.